How do you go why you can start habits but cannot keep them is a question that usually points toward a structural design flaw. Motivation feels like a foundation, but it behaves more like a weather system, unpredictable, temporary, and entirely outside your control. The energy that drove you to start a new habit was never designed to sustain it indefinitely over time. Motivation spikes around novelty, around the feeling that change is finally possible and within your reach. Once that novelty fades, the spike fades with it, and the habit is left standing on nothing solid. Research in behavioral psychology consistently shows that motivation is state-dependent. It rises and falls with your mood, your sleep, and your stress. A habit built on motivation is only as strong as your worst Tuesday afternoon will allow it to be. What the research actually points toward is a different target entirely, one that doesn't depend on how you feel. That target is automaticity, the point where a behavior runs without requiring a conscious decision at all. Automaticity doesn't ask whether you're motivated today, it simply executes because the conditions are right. The goal was never to feel driven every single day you needed to show up. The number 66 gets repeated so often, it started to feel like a biological law governing human behavior. That figure comes from one study, and the actual range in that same study ran from 18 days all the way to 254. What that spread tells you is that automaticity isn't a fixed destination sitting at a predictable point on the calendar. It's a threshold your brain crosses when the behavior has been repeated in a consistent context enough times to require less deliberate effort. Some habits reach that threshold quickly because they're simple and the cue is stable, like drinking water with your morning coffee. Others take months because the behavior is complex or the environment keeps shifting underneath it. So counting days is the wrong instrument for measuring progress. What you're actually watching for is the feeling of reduced mental resistance. When a habit starts to feel like something you do rather than something you're trying to do, that's the signal that automaticity is building. The timeline varies because your life varies, and that's not a flaw in your design. Motivation gets the habit started, but a cue is what actually calls it forward each day. Without a reliable signal from the environment, the brain has no prompt to run the routine it's been building. Think of a cue as a trigger wired directly into the sequence. Remove it, and the sequence simply doesn't fire. Research on habit formation shows that behavior is far more context-dependent than most people want to believe. The location you're in, the time of day, the object sitting on your counter, these are doing more work than your character is. When cues shift, habits collapse, not because you changed, but because the signal disappeared. People who move to a new city often lose habits that felt completely automatic in their old environment. The routine hadn't weakened, the cue had vanished, and the brain had nothing to latch onto. Weak cues produce the same result: a habit that feels fragile, inconsistent, and eventually abandoned. Designing a stable, specific cue is not a small detail. It's the load-bearing wall of the entire structure. So the design question isn't how to want it more. It's how to make the first step almost effortless. That's where the minimum version comes in. A stripped-down form of the habit you can complete even on your worst days. Not a compromise, a guarantee. The minimum version protects the cue, the routine, and the identity, even when everything else falls apart. Missing one day does not undo the neural pathways you've been quietly building over weeks. The habit isn't gone, the cue is still there, the routine is still encoded, and the reward still waits. What actually threatens your progress isn't the missed day itself, but the story you tell yourself immediately after. Research on habit interruption consistently shows that a single lapse has almost no measurable effect on long-term automaticity. The damage comes from the decision that follows, the one that says this lapse proves something permanent about you. That interpretation is the real disruption, not the skipped morning, not the missed workout, not the forgotten journal. One missed instance is statistical noise inside a pattern that already exists in your brain. The pattern was built by every day you showed up, and one absence doesn't erase that record. What matters now is the very next choice, not a verdict on your character. That next choice is where the habit either continues or quietly begins to drift. Missing one day doesn't break a habit, but the story you tell yourself afterward very often does. That internal narrative, the one that says you've already failed, is where the real damage begins. The brain doesn't register a single lapse as a collapse, but it does register what you do next with sharp precision. If you skip the gym on Tuesday and then again on Wednesday, the cue-routine connection starts to loosen its grip. By the third miss, the behavior no longer feels automatic. It feels like something you used to do. Researchers call this the abstinence violation effect, the psychological shift where one break becomes permission for another. Without a pre-planned restart, the mind treats the gap as the new normal rather than a temporary detour. Identity follows behavior, and a few missed days quietly rewrite how you see yourself as someone who exercises, or reads, or sleeps well. The spiral isn't a character flaw, it's a design flaw, and design flaws have specific fixes. The research points toward 3 design decisions that quietly determine whether a habit survives. First, attach the habit to something you already do every day without thinking about it. Not a time of day, not a vague intention, a specific existing behavior that fires reliably, like brewing coffee or sitting down at your desk. Second, define the minimum version of the habit you'll accept on a hard day, something so small it barely counts. That floor keeps the neural pathway warm even when energy and motivation have completely disappeared. Third, decide right now what your restart looks like, not after a lapse, but before one ever happens. A written plan, a single sentence, removes the decision cost at exactly the moment you're least equipped to make decisions. These 3 elements don't compete with each other, they interlock. The cue removes the need to remember, the minimum version removes the need to perform, and the restart plan removes the need to recover perfectly. A habit designed this way doesn't depend on you being at your best. It only needs you to show up.